When the earthquake hit, I quickly dragged Chloe out through the back door of the motel. By the time we made it to the front street, covered in dust, we saw Mom and Dad kneeling in front of the half-collapsed building, crying hysterically. Just as we were about to run over, a firefighter turned around and yelled, "There are 2 girls trapped under here, but we can only pull one out first." Without a second of hesitation, Mom screamed back, "Save the older one first. Please save Chloe first." Dad held Mom's shoulders tightly, his voice trembling but firm. "Yes, save Chloe first. She's always been weak, she can't hold on much longer." Hearing that, my hand, which was halfway raised to call out to them, froze in midair. Chloe pushed past me and ran toward them, shouting, "Mom, I'm here. I'm okay." Mom looked up, her eyes lighting up instantly. She threw her arms around Chloe, sobbing, "My sweet girl. I thought I'd lost you forever." Dad's eyes were red too. He rubbed his hands together anxiously, looking Chloe over. "Are you hurt anywhere? Does it hurt? Let me carry you to the doctor." From beginning to end, not a single person looked back at me. I stood right behind them, barefoot, covered in blood, looking like a total mess. Finally, a paramedic noticed me and walked over. "Where's your family, sweetie?" I looked at the 3 of them, huddled together and crying, and smiled faintly. "I don't have any family. I came here alone." "Doctor, please check my daughter. She just scraped her arm on some falling debris." In the medical tent, Mom's frantic voice drowned out the groans of the other injured people around us. She held Chloe's wrist tightly, pushing her toward the triage desk. Chloe was wearing a clean windbreaker. Aside from a bit of dust on her hem, she only had a tiny red scratch, less than an inch long, on her left forearm. It wasn't even bleeding. The ER doctor looked up, his face exhausted. "Ma'am, you can just grab an antiseptic wipe from the station next door. Please clear the space for the severely injured." "How can you say that?" Dad squeezed in from behind, looking furious. "Do you know how fast bacteria mutate these days? What if she gets tetanus? Chloe has always had a weak immune system. You can't just brush us off like this." Chloe shrank behind Dad, pulling gently on his sleeve. "Dad, I'm really fine. I just brushed against the door frame when I ran out." "You were still traumatized, sweetie," Mom said, stroking Chloe's hair lovingly. She pulled an unopened bottle of Fiji water from her bag and handed it to her. "Here, drink some water to calm your nerves." When I saw that building collapse, my heart almost stopped. I sat on a plastic stool less than 2 yards away from them. Blood was dripping from the bottom of my right foot. When we ran out, I was in such a hurry that I lost one of my sneakers. Stepping on shattered glass and sharp rocks, a deep, jagged gash had been ripped open across my entire right sole. The flesh was torn open, caked with dirt and gravel. A young nurse walked over to me with a trauma kit and gasped, "Sweetheart, this needs stitches. Is your family here? Someone needs to hold your leg down. It's going to hurt without local anesthesia." I looked down at the metal basin of saline water, which was quickly turning red with my blood. "No need," I said quietly. "I can hold myself down." The nurse hesitated, looking over at the 3 people fussing over Chloe just a few feet away. "Aren't those your parents? You look just like them." "No," I said, lifting my right leg onto the sterile stand. "Please just stitch it up quickly. I'm in a hurry." The nurse didn't ask any more questions. She tore open the gauze and began cleaning the wound. A sharp, blinding pain shot straight to my brain. I bit my lower lip, refusing to make a sound. This wasn't the first time. When I was 8, a massive blizzard hit our town overnight. Chloe and I both came down with a high fever at the same time. Our family only had one old truck back then, and the engine wouldn't start. Dad spent forever trying to get it running in the freezing snow. Mom wrapped Chloe in layers of heavy blankets, carried her to the front seat, and then turned to me. "Norah, be a good girl. Just stay under the covers and sweat it out. You'll be fine. Chloe is too fragile. If her fever stays this high, she'll get pneumonia. We have to take her to the hospital first." That night, I lay alone in a freezing room until dawn. By the time they returned the next morning with Chloe, whose fever had broken, I had already lost consciousness. I ended up on an 4 drip in the hospital for a whole week. Instead of feeling sorry, they blamed me for kicking off my blankets at night, calling me a difficult child who always caused trouble. It was no different now. The nurse's needle pierced my skin, pulling 5 stitches through the flesh. Sweat poured down my forehead. I grabbed a paper towel and wiped it away. By the time I hopped on one foot to the pharmacy counter to get my antibiotics and limped back, the 3 of them were already walking out of the tent. Dad was carefully guiding Chloe by her shoulder. Mom was holding a cotton swab, still gently dabbing ointment on a scratch that had already disappeared. I limped behind them, keeping a distance of about 15 yards. "There's a shuttle bus for evacuees up ahead. We'll head back to the city and check into a hotel first," Dad said, pointing toward the intersection. Chloe nodded. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she stopped and turned around. "Wait, where's Norah?" Everything was so chaotic, I didn't see where she went. Mom followed her gaze and turned around. She finally saw me standing under the street lamp, barefoot on one side, with my jeans soaked in blood. Her brow furrowed instantly. Norah, where on earth have you been idling around? Everyone is trying to evacuate, and you're running off causing trouble. You even managed to lose a shoe. Dad looked equally annoyed, walking over to tower over me. Chloe is already shaken up. She doesn't need you making her worry. Hurry up and get in line. Stop wasting everyone's time. There was a long line in front of the shuttle bus. With so many people evacuating the disaster zone, the bus was packed in no time. When it was our turn, the driver blocked the door. Only 3 seats left. The last person to board will have to stand. Dad turned to look at a tired Chloe. Chloe just went through a shock. She needs to sit down and rest. Mom immediately chimed in, her tone matter of fact. I get motion sickness easily, so I need a seat too. And David, your back has been acting up. You can't stand for a 3-hour drive on these mountain roads. Instinctively, all 3 of them turned their eyes to me. I looked down at my right foot, which was wrapped in thick, white gauze. Norah, Mom said, softening her voice with her usual coaxing tone. You're young and healthy. Standing for a bit is nothing. Chloe was terrified today. Just let her have this, okay? Dad urged from behind. Get on the bus, Norah. People are waiting behind us. Don't hold up the line. Chloe tugged at my sleeve, looking apologetic. Norah, why don't you take the seat? I think I can manage. Mom immediately pulled her back. Manage what? You're so fragile. If you stand for 3 hours, you'll end up sick again. Norah has always been tough. She'll be fine standing. I looked at them, but didn't say a single word. Gripping the handrail, I dragged my right foot, the one with 5 fresh stitches, onto the bus. I walked all the way to the aisle of the very back row and grabbed the overhead strap. The bus started. The mountain roads were winding and rough, causing the bus to sway violently. I had to shift all my weight onto my left leg, keeping my right foot slightly off the floor. But the rough motion kept bringing my injured foot into contact with the rubber floor. Every bump sent a sickening wave of pain straight up my leg. Through the reflection in the window glass, I could see the front rows. Mom was peeling a snack for Chloe, feeding her. Dad took off his jacket and gently draped it over Chloe's lap. They were talking in soft, comforting whispers, soothing her. Not once did anyone turn around to check on me. No one even asked where the blood on my jeans had come from. During my junior year of high school, I won first place in the National Physics Olympiad. The award ceremony was held in the state capitol, and parents were required to attend. I had placed the invitation on the living room table 2 weeks in advance. Mom had smiled and promised me back then. Of course we'll go. We'll even buy you some new clothes as a reward. But on the morning of the ceremony, Chloe complained of a mild headache. It was just a slight cold. Yet, Mom panicked instantly. She grabbed the thermometer and called Dad to take the day off. I stood in the living room, my backpack on, watching them run around in circles. Mom, we need to leave. Our train departs in 40 minutes, I reminded her. Mom poured hot water for Chloe, not even turning her head. Norah, Chloe is sick and needs us. You'll have to go by yourself. But the advisor said a parent has to sign the registry. Just explain it to your advisor. Tell them there's a family emergency. You've always been independent, Norah. You can handle this little thing on your own. That day, I was the only student on the stage without a parent in the audience. Holding my trophy, the flashing lights from the cameras felt blinding and cold. When I got home, they were huddled around the TV, watching a comedy with Chloe. Their laughter spilled out through the cracks of the door, sounding incredibly loud. Suddenly, the bus slammed on its brakes. I lost my balance, and my right foot crashed heavily onto the floor. The stitches tore instantly. The blinding pain made my vision go black. I leaned heavily against the back of a seat, taking deep breaths for a long time before I could stand straight again. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out with one hand. It was an email from a university abroad. Dear Norah Vance, we are pleased to inform you that your exchange student application has passed the preliminary review. Please log into the portal within 3 days to confirm your final decision. Once confirmed, we will mail your visa documents and official acceptance package. I stared at the text in silence. 3 months ago, I had secretly submitted this application. A full scholarship with a 2-year exchange program at the London School of Economics. It was my ticket to completely escape this place. In the front row, Chloe seemed to hear the commotion and turned around. Norah, are you okay? That break was so sudden. Mom's voice quickly followed. She's fine. She just needs to hold on tight. Chloe, stop turning around. It'll make your motion sickness worse. Just close your eyes and sleep. I tapped my screen, turning it off, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I'm fine, I said, offering Chloe a small smile. Go to sleep. Don't worry about me. The bus dropped us off in front of a high-end restaurant downtown. Dad had booked a private room in advance, claiming they needed a fancy dinner to wash away the bad luck of the earthquake. I dragged my bleeding foot, slowly walking at the very back of the group. Several relatives were already waiting in the private room. Having heard about our narrow escape, they had rushed over to see us. "Oh, Chloe, look how pale you are, you poor thing." Aunt Beatrice gasped the moment she saw Chloe, pulling her into a tight hug. "I know," Mom sighed, sitting down next to Chloe. "This child has never experienced anything so terrifying. When that building collapsed, I thought I was going to lose my mind. Thank God she's safe. Chloe is truly blessed." The relatives chimed in, praising Mom and Dad for being such dedicated parents. The room went quiet for a second when I pushed the door open and walked in. "Oh, Norah is back safely too," Uncle Frank said dryly, his eyes falling on my jeans. "What happened to your leg? Why is there so much blood?" Dad was busy looking at the menu and didn't even look up. "She probably just tripped. She never looks where she's going anyway. Don't worry about her, let's order." I sat down at the empty seat at the very edge of the table. The waiters started serving the food, and every single dish was seafood. Lobster, raw oysters, garlic shrimp. I didn't eat shellfish. When I was 12, I ended up in the ER with severe anaphylactic shock because Mom forced me to eat shrimp. Since then, I stayed far away from all shellfish. But in this family that detail didn't matter, because Chloe loved seafood. "I can't eat this," I said, putting down my fork. Dad slammed his glass onto the table, his face turning dark. "Norah, what is your problem now? Today is a celebration for Chloe's safe return. Everyone is happy, and you have to ruin the mood with that miserable face. We let you slide at home, but in front of your aunts and uncles, do you have no manners at all?" The atmosphere in the room froze instantly. The relatives exchanged glances, trying to defuse the tension. "David, come on. The girl just survived an earthquake, she's probably still scared." "Yeah, Norah is just quiet. Don't get mad at her." I sat quietly in my chair, listening to their labels. Quiet, stubborn, difficult. These were the labels I could never shake off at this table, or in this family. My phone vibrated in my pocket again. I pulled it out. It was an automated reminder from the university system, letting me know I had 48 hours left to confirm my enrollment. I opened the browser and typed in my credentials. "Do you accept the offer for this exchange program? Once confirmed, this action cannot be undone." A dialog box popped up in the center of the screen. I looked at the two options, my thumb hovering over the screen. "Norah." Mom's voice broke my thoughts. She pulled a debit card from her purse and slid it across the table. "This earthquake was a wake-up call. Your dad and I decided to sign Chloe up for some trauma therapy sessions once we get home. The sessions are quite expensive, so you won't be going to your prep courses next month. Your grades are stable anyway, you can just study on your own." She spoke casually, as if delivering a completely insignificant piece of news. "Take this card tomorrow and withdraw some cash. Oh, and stop by the mall to buy Chloe some new outfits. Hers got ruined in the debris." I looked up from my phone screen to the debit card. This was my worth to them. Whenever they needed to weigh their options, I was always the one to be discarded, sacrificed, and treated as a tool. I took a quiet breath. My thumb pressed down firmly on confirm. Enrollment confirmed. "Thank you for your response." The green text flashed on the screen and then vanished. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. "Okay," I said, picking up the card and putting it in my other pocket. "I'll go tomorrow." Seeing how quickly I agreed, Mom's expression softened a bit. "Make sure to box up the leftovers after dinner. Don't let them go to waste." By the third day after we returned home, the living room was filled with shopping bags. They were all the new clothes and premium vitamins I had bought for Chloe the day before, just as Mom had ordered. Chloe sat on the sofa, unboxing them one by one. "This beige trench coat is gorgeous. I've wanted this forever," she said, holding it up against herself with a bright smile. "As long as you like it, sweetie. You can wear it when you head back to school," Mom said warmly, bringing over a plate of sliced fruit. I stood in the hallway leading to the balcony, holding a broom. Though my right foot still throbbed with a dull pain, I could finally walk slowly. According to the rules of this house, as long as I could move, the chores were my responsibility. "Norah, remember to water the plants on the balcony. Don't forget," Mom called out, not even looking back. I didn't answer. I just quietly swept up the dust on the floor. Tomorrow was Monday. Chloe had been granted a week off from her college classes because her therapist recommended she rest. But as for me, I had already bought a one-way ticket to London for tomorrow afternoon. The express package containing my visa and documents had arrived yesterday. While they were all watching TV in the living room, I packed the documents into the deepest pocket of my backpack. I didn't have many belongings. A few changes of clothes, some essential textbooks, and a 3-year-old laptop. A single carry-on suitcase was enough to fit my entire past. After dinner, Dad came out of his study holding 3 concert tickets. There's a symphony concert at the Civic Center tomorrow night. The guest conductor is Chloe's favorite. I managed to get 3 front-row tickets. Let's go as a family and unwind. Chloe jumped up in excitement. "Really? Oh my gosh, thank you, Dad. She wrapped her arms around his, beaming like a little girl. Mom smiled warmly. Perfect. Chloe can wear her new trench coat. She'll look beautiful. From start to finish, they never mentioned why there were only 3 tickets. Perhaps, in their minds, I was never meant to be included in events that required spending money or creating happy family memories. Norah, Dad finally seemed to remember I was in the room and turned to me. We won't be home for dinner tomorrow. Just make yourself some instant noodles. Also, remember to hang up the laundry in the dryer. And your sister's cashmere sweater can't go in the machine. Wash it by hand. I stood by the kitchen door, looking at the sink piled high with dishes. Okay, I said, my voice incredibly calm. I will. The next afternoon, the weather was beautiful. Mom and Dad left early with Chloe. They said they were going to get Chloe's hair done downtown, before heading out for a nice dinner. The front door clicked shut, and the house fell into absolute silence. I took my time washing the last dish and dried my hands. Then, I walked back to my room, and pulled out my old black suitcase. There wasn't much of mine in this room anyway. I didn't take anything they had bought for me, including the old, lagging phone. After performing a factory reset on it, I placed it right in the center of my desk. Next to it, I laid my spare house key. I took one last look at the room I had lived in for years. There was no attachment, no sadness. Only a profound sense of relief, like a heavy weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I wheeled my suitcase to the entryway, and put on a pair of sneakers I had bought with my own savings. No note. No goodbye texts. I pushed the door open and stepped into the bright, warm afternoon sun. At 3 p.m., I boarded the plane. I pulled out a cheap burner phone and inserted a new SIM card I had registered the day before. My old phone number had been permanently deactivated. Every contact associated with the Vance family was left on that old phone on my desk, wiped clean. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the seat. Excuse me, miss, please fasten your seatbelt. We are preparing for takeoff, the flight attendant said softly. I opened my eyes and smiled at her. Thank you. I will. The cabin of the Boeing 777 smelled of stale upholstery, instant coffee, and the sharp, chemical tang of aviation fuel. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Norah leaned her head against the cool, vibrating plastic of the window frame. Below, the tarmac of the runway was a dark, wet ribbon reflecting the orange runway lights. She did not look back. With her right foot propped slightly on her carry-on bag to relieve the pressure on her stitches, she felt each thump of the wheels against the joints in the concrete. The pain was still there, a dull, rhythmic ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, but it felt distant now, like an old radio station fading out. As she drove past the hills, by the time the engines roared to life and the force of the acceleration pushed her back into her seat, she closed her eyes. The sensation of leaving the ground was surprisingly quiet. There was a sudden lightness, a brief pocket of turbulence that made the cabin creak, and then nothing but the steady, white noise of the clouds. She slept for 7 hours. When she woke, the cabin lights were dimmed to a soft, artificial twilight. Her foot felt stiff and swollen inside her sneaker. She carefully untied the laces, easing the shoe off her heel. The white gauze was dry, though a small, rust-colored spot had bloomed near the center where the skin had pulled during the boarding process. The passenger next to her, an elderly man reading a dense volume on European history, glanced down at her foot and then back at her face. A nasty fall? He asked, his voice low so as not to disturb the sleeping Rose around them. An earthquake, Norah said simply. The man raised his eyebrows, his expression softening with a touch of sympathy. Ah, you were in the valley? It was all over the news here. A terrible business. You are lucky to have made it out. Yes, Norah said, looking down at the neat, black stitches visible through a gap in the bandage. I was very lucky. She did not explain that her survival was entirely her own doing, or that the people who were supposed to protect her had been busy counting the scratches on another girl's arm. Some things did not need to be spoken aloud to be true. When the plane landed at Heathrow, the London air was damp and bitingly cold. It was late afternoon, and the sky was a heavy, slate gray that seemed to hover just above the rooftops of the terminal. Norah queued at the immigration desk for nearly an hour, her right leg trembling slightly from the strain of standing. The officer behind the glass counter examined her visa, then looked up at her pale face and the slight limp she was trying to conceal. LSE exchange program? He asked, stamping the page with a dull thud. Yes, sir. Economics. Welcome to London. Make sure you get that foot looked at. The damp here doesn't do wonders for healing. Thank you. I will. Norah took her passport and walked out into the arrival hall. The space was filled with drivers holding cardboard signs and families reuniting with tears and loud embraces. She passed them without stopping, her single suitcase rolling smoothly behind her on the polished floor. She took the Piccadilly line into the city. The underground carriage was crowded with commuters in dark wool coats, their faces buried in free newspapers or staring blankly at the advertisements above the seats. Nobody looked at her. Nobody wondered where she had come from, or why she was traveling with so little. To them, she was just another face in the crowd. And for the first time in her life, that anonymity felt like a luxury. At 8:30 p.m., the front door of the Vance home unlocked. "Oh, that was absolutely marvelous." Chloe's voice echoed through the hallway. Light and musical. The way the conductor handled the second movement of the Rachmaninoff, I felt like I could barely breathe. "I'm just glad it took your mind off things, sweetheart," Mom said, her voice warm as she kicked off her heels in the entryway. "You've been through so much. You deserved a beautiful night." Dad walked in behind them, carrying 2 shopping bags from the boutique downtown, where they had stopped before dinner. "Let's get some hot tea going. Norah, come help your mother with these bags." There was no response. The house was dark, save for the faint green glow of the microwave clock in the kitchen. The air smelled slightly of old wooden floorboards and the lavender detergent Mom liked to use. It was quiet, too quiet. "Norah?" Mom called out, her voice sharpening with irritation. "Did you fall asleep already? I told you to leave the hallway light on." She flicked the wall switch. The bright LED light flooded the living room, revealing the neat rows of shopping bags from the previous day still sitting by the sofa. The sink in the kitchen was sparkling clean, the dishes dried and stacked neatly in the cabinets. "She probably went to bed early," Dad muttered, dropping the shopping bags onto the armchair. "She's always had that passive-aggressive streak when she doesn't get her way, probably still sulking about the concert." "Honestly, she is so childish sometimes," Mom sighed, walking into the kitchen to fill the kettle. "She knows Chloe needed this night. Why does she always have to make everything about her?" Chloe stood in the middle of the room, her new beige trench coat draped over her arm. She looked toward the hallway that led to Nora's bedroom. "Maybe she's really tired, Mom," Chloe said softly, though there was a small crease between her brows. "Her foot looked really bad on the bus yesterday. There was a lot of blood." "Oh, please," Mom said, waving a hand dismissively. "If it were that serious, she would have said something. You know Norah, she loves to play the martyr. If she had a real injury, she'd be parading it around to make us feel guilty. She probably just scraped it on a twig and made a mountain out of a molehill." Dad went to his study to hang up his coat, but stopped by Nora's door. Knocked once hard. "Norah, open up. Your mother needs you to empty the dryer." Silence. "Norah." Dad's voice took on a warning tone. He reached for the brass doorknob and turned it. The door opened with a slight creak. The room was cold. The window was shut tightly, and the small desk lamp was turned off. The bed was made with military precision, the thin gray blanket pulled taut over the mattress, the pillow fluffed and centered. On the desk, sitting exactly in the middle of the dark wood surface, was Nora's old smartphone. Beside it lay her silver house key on a small metal ring. Dad frowned, stepping into the room. He reached out and picked up the phone. The screen was dark. He pressed the power button, but the display remained black. When he tried again, the screen lit up with the initial setup menu, the factory reset screen. "What is this?" Dad muttered. Mom walked down the hallway, carrying a mug of chamomile tea. "What's taking so long? Is she refusing to get up?" "She's not here," Dad said, holding up the phone and the key. "What do you mean she's not here?" Mom stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the neat, empty space. She walked over to the wardrobe and pulled the doors open. Inside, the hangers were mostly empty. A few old winter coats that Norah had outgrown years ago hung lonely on the rack. The bottom shelves, where she usually kept her jeans and sweaters, were completely bare. The small plastic storage box she used for her school papers was gone. Did she go to a friend's house? Mom's voice faltered slightly, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Without her phone?" Dad asked, tapping the screen of the device in his hand. "And she left her key. How is she going to get back in?" "She must be at her university dorm," Chloe said from the doorway, her voice small. "The semester started last week." "But she wasn't supposed to move back until next Sunday," Mom said, her voice rising in pitch. "And she didn't say a word to us. She just left, without saying goodbye, after everything we've done for her." "She's throwing a tantrum," Dad said firmly, though his chest tightened with a strange, unfamiliar discomfort. "She wants us to call her, to beg her to come home. It's a classic attention-seeking stunt. Well, I'm not playing into it." "But her phone is reset, David," Mom pointed out, her voice trembling slightly, as she looked at the empty desk. "How are we supposed to call her?" "She'll buy a new SIM card or use her computer," Dad said, turning on his heel and walking out of the room. "She'll call us by tomorrow afternoon when she realizes she needs her allowance. Let her sit in her empty dorm for a night. It'll do her some good to realize how easy she has it here." Mom stood in the center of Nora's room for a long minute. The silence of the space felt heavy, almost suffocating. For the first time, she noticed how small the room actually was, hardly bigger than a walk-in closet, with a window that faced the brick wall of the neighbor's garage. It was the room they had designated for storage when they first bought the house, before they decided to turn it into a bedroom for their second child. She shook her head, trying to clear the sudden cold draft that seemed to blow through the floorboards. Unbelievable, Mom whispered to herself, her fingers tightening around her warm mug. She really has no gratitude. The medical clinic at LSE was located in a quiet red brick building just off Houghton Street. It smelled of eucalyptus and clean linoleum. Norah sat on the edge of the examination table, her right leg extended. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a sensible haircut, was carefully snipping the black threads from her sole. The doctor who did this did a decent job under pressure, the doctor said, using a pair of tweezers to slide the first stitch out. Nora's jaw clenched, her hands gripping the edge of the vinyl table, until her knuckles turned white. But they should have given you antibiotics immediately. And standing on it for a 3-hour bus ride? What were you thinking, young lady? I didn't have much of a choice, Norah said quietly. The doctor paused, looking up through her spectacles. There is always a choice. When it comes to a deep laceration on the weight-bearing surface of the foot. Where were your parents? They were busy. The doctor's gaze lingered on Norah for a moment longer, noticing the cheap, worn sneakers, the thin sweater that was slightly too large, and the absolute stillness in the girl's face. In her line of work, she had seen many kinds of students. The homesick ones who cried over minor colds, the arrogant ones who demanded immediate service, and the quiet ones who had learned very early in life that no one was coming to help them. Norah belonged to the third category. Well, the doctor said, her voice softening as she returned to her work. You are in London now. The NHS might be slow, but we don't leave people to walk on glass. I'm going to clean this out thoroughly, apply some silver dressings to prevent infection, and write you a prescription for a proper course of penicillin. You are to keep off this foot as much as possible for the next 10 days. Do you understand? I have classes, Norah said. Then you will take the bus or use the campus disability shuttle, the doctor replied firmly. I will write a note for your department. If you tear these tissues again, you risk permanent nerve damage. Do you want to walk with a limp for the rest of your life? Norah looked at the small tray of silver instruments. No. Good. Then we are agreed. After the clinic, Norah limped to the nearby pharmacy to collect her medication, then made her way back to her graduate student housing. The room was tiny, just a bed, a desk, and a small wardrobe, but it was entirely hers. There were no photographs on the walls, no decorative pillows, no reminders of the life she had left behind. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and logged into the university portal to register her modules. The screen lit up with her courses: Advanced Microeconomics, Quantitative Methods, International Trade Theory. As she clicked confirm, a small notification popped up in the corner of her screen. It was an email from the Student Services Department back home, forwarded to her new LSE address. Subject: Urgent, contact from family. Norah stared at the subject line for a long time. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. She opened the email. Dear Norah, your mother has contacted our office multiple times today claiming she cannot reach you and that your phone is disconnected. She sounds extremely distressed. Please contact her immediately to let her know you are safe. If you are experiencing any personal difficulties, please remember that the student counseling services are available. Sincerely, Assistant Registrar, Student Affairs. Norah did not feel her heart race. She did not feel the familiar, tight knot of anxiety that used to form in her chest whenever Mom's name appeared on her screen. She clicked reply. Dear Registrar, thank you for forwarding the message. Please inform Mrs. Vance that I am currently enrolled in an official academic program abroad and am fully safe. Due to personal reasons, I have chosen to terminate my previous phone contract and will not be maintaining regular contact. I appreciate your assistance in clarifying this matter, so she does not continue to disturb your office. Best regards, Norah Vance. She hit send. Then she closed the laptop, took 2 of her prescribed pills with a glass of tap water, and lay down on her narrow bed. The rain began to patter against her window pane, a steady, rhythmic sound that soon lulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. A week passed, then 2. In the Vance household, the initial anger had gradually hardened into a tense, uncomfortable silence. Norah's name was rarely mentioned, but her absence was felt in 100 small, irritating ways. David, where is the steamer? Mom called out from the utility room, her voice carrying a sharp edge of frustration. I've been looking for it for 20 minutes. Chloe's silk blouse is completely wrinkled. How should I know? Dad yelled back from the living room, not looking up from his tablet. Norah usually keeps track of those things. Well, Norah isn't here, is she? Mom walked into the living room, her face flushed. And she still hasn't called. It's been more than 2 weeks, David. This is getting ridiculous. I called her university residence, and they told me she hadn't checked into her room at all this semester. Dad stopped scrolling. What do you mean she hasn't checked in? Where is she? Staying then? With some classmate. They wouldn't give me any more information, Mom said, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and a strange, cold fear she refused to acknowledge. They kept citing privacy regulations. Privacy. To her own mother. I told them I was her parent, but they just repeated the same bureaucratic nonsense. Did you call her old number again? It's disconnected, I told you. The account was under our family plan, but when I called the carrier, they said the line had been permanently closed by the user. She must have gone to a different store and set up her own plan. Chloe walked down the stairs, wearing her new trench coat. She looked pale, her eyes slightly puffy. Mom, I don't feel well, she murmured, leaning against the door frame. My stomach hurts again. The doctor said the trauma from the earthquake might have triggered some irritable bowel issues. Oh, my poor darling. Mom immediately turned her attention to Chloe, her frustration with Norah momentarily forgotten. She hurried over to feel Chloe's forehead. Let me make you some ginger tea. David, can you go to the pharmacy and get those digestive enzymes the specialist recommended? I went yesterday, Dad said, a hint of weariness in his voice. They were out of stock. I have to drive to the clinic downtown to get them. Then go downtown. Mom said, her voice rising. Chloe is in pain. I have a conference call in 20 minutes, Susan. Dad snapped his patience. Finally wearing thin. I can't just drive across town every time Chloe has a stomach ache. Can't you go? I have to take her to her therapy session at 2. Mom argued. And who is going to prepare her lunch? She can't eat takeout with her condition. Chloe looked between her parents, her lips trembling. It's okay. I can just lie down. I don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing trouble, sweetie, Mom said quickly, glared at Dad. Your father is just being selfish. I am not being selfish. Dad stood up, his face dark. I am the only one working to pay for these expensive therapy sessions and those high-end outfits you insisted on buying. If Norah were here, she would have gone to the pharmacy without all this drama. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. For a moment, none of them spoke. It was the first time any of them had openly admitted that Norah's primary function in the house was to absorb the friction of their daily lives, to run the errands, handle the chores, and act as the quiet buffer that kept their fragile household from colliding. Well, she's not here, Mom said quietly, her voice cold. She decided to run away and play her little games. So we will just have to manage without her. But as she walked into the kitchen to put the kettle on, she looked at the empty counter where Norah usually prepared the weekly meal prep. The kitchen felt unusually large, cold, and empty. At LSE, the winter term was rigorous. Norah quickly found that the academic workload was a relief. In the library, surrounded by towers of leather-bound volumes and the quiet click of laptop keys, she didn't have to think about the past. She only had to think about mathematical models, statistical proofs, and economic history. Her tutor, Professor Alistair Vance, no relation, which they both found mildly amusing, was a dry, elderly Scotsman who rarely praised anyone. But during her 3rd week, he called her into his office after a seminar on econometric modeling. Your paper on post-disaster resource allocation, he said, tapping a printout on his desk with a blunt finger. It's remarkably clinical. Most students write these things with a great deal of emotional fluff, talking about human suffering and community spirit. You've treated the entire population as a set of variables, under extreme constraint. Is that a criticism, Professor? Norah asked, her face expressionless. No, Alistair said, leaning back in his leather chair. It's an observation. In economics, sentimentality is often the enemy of efficiency. You've identified a core truth. In a crisis, you cannot save everyone. The cost of trying to save the weak often leads to the destruction of the strong. It's cold, but it's mathematically sound. He looked at her over his spectacles. You have a very sharp mind, Miss Vance. And a very quiet one. Where did you learn to analyze things so dispassionately? I've had some practice, Norah said. Well, keep at it. I'm putting your name forward for the undergraduate research fellowship next term. It comes with a small stipend and your own workspace in the department. It might help with your living expenses. Thank you, Professor. That would be very helpful. As she walked out of his office, she felt a quiet, solid warmth in her chest. It wasn't the fleeting excitement of a reward. It was the steady reassurance of utility. Here, she was valued not because she was tough, or because she could hand-wash cashmere sweaters, but because her mind was precise. Her foot had healed completely now, leaving only a pale, jagged scar across her soul. She could walk without a limp, though she still felt a slight pull in the skin when the weather was particularly damp and cold. She bought herself a heavy, dark green wool coat from a charity shop near Covent Garden. It wasn't high-end, and it didn't have a designer label like Chloe's new trench coat, but it was warm, thick, and kept out the London rain. On her way back to her dorm, she passed a small florist shop. In the window, there were pots of purple heather, hardy and small, surviving the winter frost. On the pavement, she bought one for her windowsill. It was late November when the truth finally caught up with the Vance family. Mom had spent weeks trying to locate Norah through her old high school friends, her university department, and even her social media accounts, only to find that Norah had deactivated her profiles months ago. Finally, out of sheer desperation, Dad used his business contacts to get a meeting with the head of the admissions office at Norah's home university. The office was warm, smelling of paper and dust. The director, a neat woman named Mrs. Higgins, looked at the couple sitting across from her with a cool, professional gaze. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," she said, opening a thin folder. "I understand you are concerned about your daughter's whereabouts. But as we have explained over the phone, Norah is an adult, and her academic records are protected. She is our daughter," Mom cried, her voice cracking with a mix of exhaustion and indignation. "We pay her tuition. We have a right to know where she is. Her phone is disconnected, her room is empty. We don't even know if she's alive." Mrs. Higgins looked at Mom's expensive leather handbag, then down at the file. "Actually, Mrs. Vance, you do not pay her tuition." Mom froze. "What? Norah is on a full academic scholarship," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice calm and level. "She has been since her freshman year. Her tuition, boarding, and textbook allowances are completely covered by the State Merit Fund. The only thing you were paying for was her personal health insurance, which she officially removed herself from last month." Dad sat up straight, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "That's impossible. We gave her an allowance every semester. According to our records, those funds were deposited into a joint account that was emptied and closed on September 14th, Mrs. Higgins replied. The balance was exactly $3,000, which she had saved from her part-time tutoring job at the campus writing center. She closed the file with a soft snap. "Furthermore, Norah is not missing. She is currently participating in our prestigious international exchange program. She applied for it in June past the selection process in August and confirmed her enrollment on September 12th. Mom's heart seemed to stop. September 12th. That was the night of the earthquake dinner. The night she had handed Norah the debit card to buy Chloe's clothes and told her she couldn't take her prep courses. Where did she go? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "I cannot disclose her specific location or university," Mrs. Higgins said, her tone softening slightly but remaining firm. "But I can assure you she is safe, enrolled, and performing exceptionally well." She made it very clear in her departure paperwork that she wished to maintain strict personal boundaries regarding her family. "Strict personal boundaries?" Dad repeated, his voice rising in anger. "She's our child. We raised her. We fed her, clothed her." "David, stop," Mom whispered, her hand trembling as she reached out to grab his sleeve. She looked at Mrs. Higgins. Did she say why?" Mrs. Higgins looked at Mom for a long, quiet moment. In her 20 years in university administration, she had seen many parents who only realized they had lost their children after the door had already been locked from the inside. "She didn't need to write a detailed explanation, Mrs. Vance," Mrs. Higgins said softly. But in her emergency contacts section, where most students list their parents, she wrote, "None. In the event of an emergency, please contact the nearest medical facility. Do not notify the Vance family." The room went entirely silent. The heating vent in the corner hummed softly, blowing warm, dry air into the space. Mom felt a cold, heavy weight settle in her stomach. It was the same feeling she had when the motel building had collapsed, the sudden, terrifying realization that something massive and permanent had just slid out of her control. She hates us," Mom whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "She doesn't hate you, Susan," Dad said, his voice tight as he stood up though. His hands were shaking. "She's just being dramatic. She wants to see how long we can go without her. Let's go. We're not getting anything else out of this bureaucrat." But as they walked out into the chilly autumn afternoon, the silence between them was different. It wasn't the silence of anger anymore. It was the silence of a house built on sand, watching the tide come in. The London winter was dark by 4 in the afternoon. Norah adjusted to the rhythm of the city. She learned which tube carriages to board to be closest to the exit at Holborn Station, which bakery sold the cheapest day-old sourdough, and how to ignore the damp chill that seemed to cling to the stone walls of the university. Her life was small, quiet, and perfectly ordered. Every morning, she woke at 6, made a cup of black tea, and studied for 2 hours before her first lecture. In the afternoons, she worked her shift at the library, shelving books and helping freshmen navigate the digital archives. She made one friend, a tall, quiet girl named Clara from Munich, who was also studying economics. Clara was practical, didn't ask personal questions, and respected Norah's need for silence. "You work too hard, Norah," Clara said one evening as they packed up their laptops in the library. "The exams are not until January. You should come to the pub with us tonight. A pint of bitter will do you good." "I have to finish the dataset for Professor Alistair," Norah said, adjusting her green wool coat. "Alistair is an old dragon," Clara laughed. "He doesn't expect you to work on a Friday night." "I like the work," Norah said simply. And she did. In the clean, logical world of numbers, there were no favorites. If you did the work, the equation balanced. If you followed the rules of mathematics, the result was predictable. It was a beautiful, fair system, one that didn't care about fragility or strength, only about truth. As they walked out of the library, the streetlights were glowing through the thin mist. "Are you going home for the Christmas break?" Clara asked, wrapping her scarf tighter around her neck. "No," Norah said, looking at her boots as they stepped over a puddle. "I'm staying here. I applied for a winter research assistantship." Clara looked at her, a slight frown on her face. "But the campus will be empty. It's very lonely during the holidays. Don't you want to see your family?" "No," Norah said. Her voice was not angry or bitter. It was as calm and factual, as if she were stating the inflation rate of a foreign currency. "I don't have a family to go back to." Clara opened her mouth to say something, but saw the quiet, steady expression on Norah's face and stopped herself. "Well," she said softly, "then we will have a small dinner together before I leave for Munich. I will make you some real German stollen." "I'd like that," Norah smiled. "Thank you." Back in the home city, the winter was unusually harsh. The heating system in the Vance house broke down in early December, requiring a $3,000 repair that Dad hadn't budgeted for. "I don't understand why it's so expensive," Mom complained, wrapped in a heavy blanket on the sofa. "Can't we find someone cheaper?" "This was the cheapest quote, Susan," Dad said, his face lined with exhaustion. He was sitting at the dining table, surrounded by bills. "And Chloe's therapy. Bills are piling up. Her therapist says she's making progress, but she needs another 6 months of sessions." "Of course she does," Mom said defensively. "She still has nightmares about the motel. Just yesterday, she panicked when she heard a truck rumble past the house." Chloe came down the stairs, wearing 3 layers of sweaters. "Mom, is there any clean laundry? I couldn't find my green sweater." Mom sighed, rubbing her temples. "No, sweetie. I haven't had time to do the laundry today. My back has been hurting so much from the cold." "I can do it," Chloe said, though her voice was hesitant. "But how do I set the machine for cashmere? I don't want to ruin it." "Just leave it," Dad muttered, his voice sharp. "I'll do it later. Or you can wear something else." Chloe shrank back slightly, her eyes welling with tears. "I was just asking." "David, don't yell at her." Mom snapped. "She's sensitive. We are all sensitive, Susan." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "I am working 10-hour days, coming home to a freezing house, and dealing with bills I can barely pay. Norah used to handle the laundry, the cleaning, the groceries. And she did it without a single word of complaint. Don't bring up her name." Mom cried, her voice cracking. "She abandoned us. She left us when we needed her most. She's selfish, cold-hearted." "Is she?" Dad stood up, his voice dropping to a low, bitter whisper. "Or did she just finally realize that we only cared about her when we needed her to do the things we didn't want to do?" Mom stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Chloe stood on the stairs, her hands gripping the wooden banister. For the first time, a small, cold realization began to dawn on her. She had always been the favorite. She had always gotten the new clothes, the front row tickets, the soft blankets, and the warm tea. She had always believed it was because she was fragile and needed more love. But now, with Norah gone, the warmth she had taken for granted was disappearing. The house was cold, her parents were constantly fighting, and the focus of their attention was no longer a comforting shield. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. Without Norah there to take the blame, to do the chores, to be the difficult one, the family was slowly, inevitably falling apart. "I want Norah to come home," Chloe whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. Nobody answered her. In March, The spring term at LSE began with a rare week of bright, clear sunshine. The daffodils and Lincolns in fields were beginning to bloom there, yellowheads nodding in the crisp spring breeze. Norah sat in her new workspace in the economics department. The fellowship had been approved, giving her a quiet cubicle with a large window overlooking the courtyard. Her phone, the new burner phone she had bought when she arrived, vibrated on the desk. She picked it up. It was a notification from her university email portal. An external user has requested contact through the LSE Alumni and Student Registry. Norah's finger hesitated. She had set her privacy settings to high, but the university policy allowed family members to submit welfare check requests through a third-party mediator if they could prove relationship status. She clicked the link. There was a message attached to the request. Norah, please. We know you are in London. We managed to get a confirmation from your home university's study abroad office after threatening legal action. We don't want to fight anymore. We just want to know you are okay. Chloe's health has been very poor, and your mother is beside herself with worry. We are coming to London next month for a medical consultation for Chloe's stomach condition. Please let us see you. Just for an hour. Just to know you are alive. Dad. Norah looked out the window. A group of students was sitting on the grass in the courtyard, laughing and sharing a box of donuts. The sun caught the edges of their hair, making them look bright and full of life. She felt a strange, detached curiosity as she read the email again. Chloe's health has been very poor. We are coming to London. Even now, even in an email begging for contact after 6 months of silence, the focus was still on Chloe's health. The reason they were coming to London was for Chloe's medical consultation. Her own presence was just an afterthought, a side trip to be checked off their list. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel sad. She simply felt a profound sense of clarity. She opened the reply box. Mr. Vance, I am safe, healthy, and fully focused on my academic work. I have no desire to meet during your visit to London. Please do not attempt to contact me through my university registry again, as it violates the student safety policy and I will be forced to report it to the campus security office. I wish Chloe the best with her medical consultation. Sincerely, Norah. She sent the message, closed the tab, and returned to her statistical analysis. The numbers on her screen were clean, black, and perfectly indifferent to her choices. The British Museum was crowded on a rainy Saturday afternoon in April. Norah liked the Great Court, the massive glass and steel dome that let in the grey London light, making the white stone floor look almost silver. She often came here with a book to sit on the stone benches and read, surrounded by the murmur of 1,000 foreign languages. She was walking toward the exit, her green wool coat buttoned up against the draft, when she heard a voice. Norah. The voice was hesitant, quiet, and completely familiar. Norah stopped. She turned around slowly. Standing near the base of the grand staircase was Mom. She looked older than Norah remembered. The sharp, vibrant energy she usually carried was gone, replaced by a weary, hollow look around her eyes. She was wearing her expensive designer coat, but it looked loose on her, as if she had lost weight. Behind her stood Dad and Chloe. Chloe was holding Dad's arm, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. He looked small under the high glass ceiling, her beige trench coat slightly crumpled. For a long, quiet moment, none of them spoke. The crowd of tourists flowed around them like water around a stone in a river. Norah, it really is you, Mom whispered, taking a step forward. Her hand reached out instinctively, her fingers trembling. Oh my God, look at you. Norah didn't move. She didn't step back, but she didn't step forward either. Her face remained perfectly calm. Her hands slipped into the pockets of her green coat. Hello, Norah said. Her voice was polite, the tone she would use with a stranger who had asked for directions. You're here, Mom's voice broke, tears instantly filling her eyes. We've been looking for you for days. We went to the university, but they wouldn't let us past the security desk. We didn't think we'd just run into you here. It's a public museum, Norah said. Dad stepped forward, his face a mix of relief and anger. Norah, what is the meaning of this? Why did you run away? Why did you disconnect your phone? Do you have any idea what you've put your mother through? She hasn't slept a full night in months. Norah looked at Dad. She noticed the new gray hairs near his temples, the slight stoop in his shoulders. But she felt no pity. She only felt a mild, academic interest in how much they had aged in 7 months. I didn't run away, Norah said, her voice steady and clear. I accepted an academic scholarship and moved to my new university. I left my key and my old phone because they belonged to your house. I didn't want to keep anything that wasn't mine. But you're our daughter, Mom cried, her tears finally spilling over. How could you just cut us off like that? We loved you. We did everything for you. Norah looked at Mom. Did you? The question was quiet, but it seemed to echo in the space between them. When the motel collapsed, Norah said, her voice remaining perfectly level. You told the firefighter to save Chloe first. You didn't even know where I was. Chloe was weak, Mom argued, her voice rising in a desperate attempt to defend herself. She has always been fragile, Norah. You've always been strong, you've always been able to handle yourself. I was barefoot, Norah interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than Mom's cries. My right foot was cut open by glass. I had 5 stitches without anesthesia while you were putting ointment on a scratch that wasn't even bleeding. She looked at Chloe, who shrank back behind Dad, her eyes filled with a sudden, painful shame. I wasn't strong, Norah said, looking back at Mom. I was just ignored. I learned to handle myself because I realized very early that if I didn't, nobody else would. Dad's chest heaved. We made mistakes, Norah. Every family has friction. But you can't just throw away your family over a few misunderstandings. We came all this way. We want you to come back with us. We can start over. Chloe's doctor here says she's improving. We can all. I have an exam on Monday, Norah said, checking her watch. And I have a shift at the library in an hour. I need to go. Norah, please. Mom reached out and grabbed Norah's arm. Norah didn't flinch. She simply looked down at Mom's hand on her green wool sleeve. Her gaze was so cold, so entirely devoid of emotion, that Mom's fingers slowly lost their strength and slipped away. I don't hate you, Norah said softly, looking at the 3 of them one last time. I don't hold a grudge. But I don't belong to you anymore. I've found a place where I am valued for who I am, not for what I can sacrifice for someone else. She turned around. Norah! Mom screamed behind her, her voice echoing off the ancient stone walls of the great court. Norah, please. Don't leave us. Norah did not stop. She walked toward the grand entrance, her boots clicking softly on the silver stone floor. As she stepped out of the museum, the London rain had stopped. A pale, weak sunlight was breaking through the gray clouds, lighting up the wet pavement of Great Russell Street. She took a deep breath of the damp, clean air. Behind her, the doors of the museum closed with a quiet, solid thud. She adjusted her scarf, slipped her hands into her pockets and walked toward the tube station, her steps light, steady and entirely her own.